Today, we're talking about a topic that cuts deep for a lot of men: what to do if a woman keeps rejecting you. And I want to welcome you to the channel, because this is one of those conversations that most people avoid, but every man feels at some point in his life. So let's sit with it for a moment. I'm speaking to you not just as a therapist, but as someone who has watched men crumble under this exact pressure. Men who walked into my office carrying a weight they didn't know how to put into words. I can't mention names, of course, but I can tell you this: rejection shapes you, sometimes in beautiful ways, sometimes in brutal ways, and what you do with it decides which one you become. Now here's where the conversation gets controversial. Most men think repeated rejection means they're not good enough. They think it's a sign to try harder or be nicer or prove something. But in my experience, it's often the opposite. The more a man chases someone who keeps saying no, the more he quietly rejects himself. And that's a pattern I've seen break even the strongest men. You can learn a lot about yourself when you're faced with a no that won't turn into a yes. Sometimes it reveals a wound you've ignored for years. Sometimes it uncovers a habit of seeking approval in places that were never safe for you. Sometimes it shows you how quickly you're willing to trade your self-respect for a moment of attention. But here's the part that always gives men their power back. Rejection doesn't define your worth. It reveals your direction. And when you learn how to respond, not react, you stop feeling like you're losing something every time she turns you down. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what to do, not from theory, but from years of watching men rebuild themselves brick by brick. This won't be dramatic, it won't be bitter, but it will be real, honest, and easy to understand. Let's get into it. 1. Stop chasing and start observing when a woman keeps rejecting you. Most men instinctively start pushing harder without even realizing it. They text more, they try to be funnier, nicer, more available, almost like they're trying to convince her to see their value. But here's the hard truth I've had to gently walk countless men through. Chasing a woman who repeatedly turns you down doesn't strengthen the connection. It blinds you to what's actually happening. As a therapist, I've seen this pattern unfold more times than I can count. A man sits across from me, frustrated, confused, even ashamed, because he can't understand why his effort isn't changing anything. What he doesn't realize yet is that he's been focusing on the wrong part of the equation. He's trying to change her reaction instead of understanding his own actions. And that's where the shift begins. Stop chasing. Start observing. When you slow down, step back, and remove the emotional urgency, something powerful happens. You start seeing things clearly. You notice her tone when she speaks to you, the consistency of her behavior, how she responds when you give space, and what she does when you're not the one initiating everything. You begin to pick up on things you couldn't see before because your mind was busy worrying about winning her over. I remember countless moments in sessions where a man would finally pause long enough to recognize the pattern. She wasn't rejecting him because he lacked something. She was rejecting him because she had already made her choice, and continued pursuit only made him feel more powerless. When you take a step back, you also give yourself room to breathe emotionally. You start noticing your own reactions. Why does her rejection hurt so much? Why does her approval feel so important? Why do you feel drawn to someone who consistently shows you she isn't choosing you? Those questions reveal more about inner wounds than the situation itself. Observing brings awareness, and awareness brings control. Instead of sending another message hoping for a different outcome, you let silence do the work. Instead of planning another interaction, you see how she behaves without your effort. Instead of trying to impress her, you notice whether she's even open to seeing you in that light. And here's something most men don't expect. When you stop chasing, you regain your power. You stop operating from fear of losing her, fear of missing your chance, fear of not being enough, and when the fear quiets down, your self-respect shows up again. You start holding yourself differently. You start trusting your worth instead of waiting for her to validate it. Observing isn't passive. It's intentional. It's how you reclaim your emotional clarity. It's how you realize whether a connection is mutual or one-sided, and once you see things clearly, you stop trying to force what was never meant to be forced. Because the moment you stop chasing, you finally give yourself the chance to see the truth, and the truth will always guide you better than desperation ever could. 2. Protect your self-respect first. One of the hardest lessons men struggle with, both in my office and in their personal lives, is understanding that self-respect isn't something you negotiate with someone else. It's something you defend, especially when you're dealing with repeated rejection. And if there's one thing I've learned from years of working with men, it's this: the moment you let someone else determine your value, you lose the foundation you need to stand on. When a woman keeps rejecting you, it's easy to slip into a mindset where you start questioning everything about yourself. Am I not attractive enough? Am I missing something? What does she see that I don't? These questions don't come from curiosity. They come from insecurity, and insecurity grows every time you ignore the signs she's giving you. Protecting your self-respect means stepping away from the idea that you need her acceptance to feel complete. I've seen men cling to a woman's rejection because it secretly confirms a fear they've never addressed. Maybe they grew up feeling unnoticed, maybe past relationships made them doubt their value, or maybe they've always tied their worth to someone else choosing them. Whatever the reason, they begin treating rejection like a challenge to win instead of a message to understand. But here's something I often tell men during therapy sessions. A woman rejecting you isn't an evaluation of your worth. It's simply her preference, her timing, her feelings. And you don't control any of that. What you do control is how you respond. When you protect your self-respect, your entire internal dialogue changes. Instead of thinking, how do I get her to like me? You start asking, does her behavior align with what I deserve? Instead of trying to impress her, you ask, is she showing me the same energy I'm giving her? Instead of offering endless understanding, you ask, is she offering any in return? Self-respect shifts the power back to you. It stops you from bending, shrinking, or begging for attention. It stops you from overinvesting in someone who underinvests in you. It stops you from excusing behavior that would disappoint you if it came from anyone else. I've watched men transform simply by reclaiming their boundaries. When they stopped accepting crumbs, they started expecting effort. When they stopped chasing unpredictability, they found peace. When they stopped tolerating emotional inconsistency, they discovered their own stability. And ironically, protecting your self-respect is often the exact moment when the entire dynamic changes. People notice when a man stands firmly in who he is. They notice when he no longer needs validation. They notice when he values himself enough to walk away. If something doesn't align with him, protecting your self-respect isn't about being cold or distant. It's about refusing to abandon yourself for someone who isn't choosing you, because once you lose respect for yourself, the world follows your lead. And if there's one truth men must understand, it's this: a woman can reject you, but she should never have the power to make you reject yourself. 3. Separate her no from your worth. There's a moment I've seen happen with so many men sitting across from me, shoulders heavy, eyes tired, not because a woman said no, but because they quietly turned that no into a personal verdict. And that's where the damage begins. When a woman keeps rejecting you, it's natural to feel the sting, but the real wound forms when you start believing her rejection is a reflection of your value as a man. This section matters because most men don't realize how deeply they fuse someone else's opinion with their identity. And I've watched this fusion break confidence, distort self-image, and create a kind of emotional tunnel vision. Suddenly, everything becomes about winning her over, proving something, or undoing the rejection, as if your entire sense of worth is hanging in her hands. But here's the truth I've had to repeat in sessions more times than I can count. A woman's no is information, not a judgment. It's feedback about her desires, her life, her emotional availability, her preferences, not about your value. When you separate her rejection from your identity, you start breathing again. You start realizing you're not being rejected because you're not enough. You're being rejected because you're not her choice. And there's a massive difference between those two. Think about how many men you know who doubt themselves because they chase someone who simply didn't want a relationship at that time, or wasn't ready emotionally, or was dealing with her own unresolved issues, or simply didn't feel the same connection. None of that makes you less valuable, yet men internalize it like proof in therapy. I often ask a man one simple question. If she had said yes, would you suddenly be more of a man? The answer is always no, because your worth doesn't increase when you're accepted, and it doesn't decrease when you're rejected. Your worth simply is constant, stable, non-negotiable. But here's where things get engaging. Most men never learned how to separate emotion from identity. When rejection hits, it activates old wounds, childhood moments of feeling overlooked, past relationships that ended abruptly, insecurities they never confronted. So her no becomes a trigger, not a truth, and that's what you need to unlearn. Once you stop attaching your worth to her response, you see everything more clearly. You can look at her actions with honesty instead of desperation. You can accept her decisions without internal collapse. You can walk away without feeling like you failed as a man. More importantly, you reclaim your emotional independence. You no longer wait for someone else to determine how you see yourself. You don't crumble because someone didn't choose you. You don't measure your identity by her preferences. Separating her no from your worth gives you freedom. It lets you show up authentically instead of anxiously. It helps you approach relationships from strength instead of fear. And it stops you from shrinking every time someone doesn't choose you. Back her no is not a mirror. It's a boundary. And your worth exists far beyond it. 4. Look at the pattern, not the moment. One thing I've noticed in therapy is that men often focus on the moment a woman rejects them, but they rarely step back to examine the pattern surrounding the entire situation. A single moment can be confusing, emotional, or misleading, but patterns tell the truth you've been avoiding. I remember working with someone who was caught in a loop with a woman he deeply cared for. Every few weeks she'd pull him close, warm, friendly, laughing at his jokes, even leaning on him emotionally. And then the very next week, she'd shut down and reject him again. He kept clinging to the good moments, convincing himself they meant something more. But when we broke it down, it wasn't the moments that mattered. It was the repeated cycle that was hurting him. And this is where men often struggle. They want to believe the positive moments, the glimmers of connection, the times she smiles warmly, or the moments she opens up and shares something personal. But those moments don't define the reality. The pattern does. When a woman keeps rejecting you, looking only at isolated interactions will cloud your judgment. You'll convince yourself she's almost interested, almost ready, almost choosing you because you're focused on the highlights instead of the full picture. But when you zoom out, you start seeing the truth. Does her behavior stay consistent over time? Does she only show warmth when she's bored or lonely? Does she pull away the second you show interest? Does she keep you emotionally close enough to feel valued, but far enough that you're never truly chosen? These questions expose the pattern. Men who ignore the pattern usually end up stuck. They wait for the next moment of affection. They cling to the memory of the last positive interaction. They replay old conversations, hoping they meant something deeper. But all the while, the pattern keeps repeating: warmth, distance, hope, rejection, over and over. And here's something important. Patterns don't lie. Moments do. I often tell men, if her yes lasts 5 minutes, but her no lasts 5 months, believe the 5 months. Your emotional health depends on recognizing the difference between temporary moments of closeness and a consistent pattern of rejection. What makes this even harder is that many women aren't doing it intentionally. Sometimes they're confused about what they want. Sometimes they like the emotional support, but not the romantic connection. Sometimes they're dealing with their own unresolved past, and sometimes they genuinely value you as a person, but not as a partner. And that's why focusing on the moment will always mislead you. The moment doesn't show her real feelings, her real commitment, or her real intentions. The pattern does. When you study the pattern, you make decisions from clarity instead of attachment. You stop hoping she'll change and start seeing how she consistently shows up. And once you recognize the pattern, you finally understand how to protect your time, your heart, and your future. Once you learn to read patterns over moments, you stop chasing confusion and start choosing peace. 5. Shift your focus back to your life. I've worked with many men who slowly lost themselves because they were too focused on a woman who kept turning them down. One person in particular comes to mind. He was in a relationship where he felt like he was constantly trying to prove he was worthy of her affection even though they were technically together. She rejected him emotionally every time he tried to get closer. She'd say things like, "I just need time," or "I'm not ready to commit." Yet she expected him to be fully available whenever she needed comfort or attention. He didn't notice how much of his identity he was giving away. His hobbies faded, his goals got blurry, and his confidence slipped. He stopped going to the gym, stopped hanging out with friends, stopped working on the projects that used to excite him and the painful part. He wasn't changing his life because it made him happy. He was changing his life because he thought it would make her finally accept him. That's what happens when your focus stays stuck on someone who doesn't choose you. Your world becomes smaller without you even realizing it. Every thought revolves around what she thinks, how she feels, or what she might do next. You're constantly waiting, constantly hoping, constantly adjusting, and meanwhile, your own life sits in the background collecting dust. Shifting your focus back to your life doesn't mean ignoring her out of spite. It means choosing yourself again, choosing your direction, your growth, your fulfillment. It means realizing that you can't control her choices, but you absolutely can control your own. I remember asking the man I mentioned earlier a simple question. When was the last time you did something for yourself without considering how she might react? He couldn't answer, and that silence told me everything. He had handed over so much of his identity that he no longer recognized himself outside of the relationship. When you shift focus back to your life, things start aligning again. You rediscover your ambitions. You reconnect with the people who genuinely care for you. You start nurturing routines, habits, and interests that energize you. You regain the sense of direction you lost while trying to win over someone emotionally unavailable. And here's something powerful that men often forget. The more you invest in your life, the less rejection controls you. Your value becomes self-generated, not tied to someone else's approval. Your confidence grows because you're living with intention again, not chasing validation. And here's an unexpected truth. Sometimes when men shift their focus back to themselves, the entire dynamic with the woman changes not because they're playing games, but because they stop making her the center of their world. They start showing up as grounded, independent, purpose-driven men, and whether she notices or not, you become someone who isn't defined by rejection. This is the shift that transforms everything. When your life becomes your priority again, no rejection can stop your momentum. 6. Set emotional boundaries that keep you grounded. One of the most transformative things I've witnessed in men is what happens when they finally learn how to set emotional boundaries. Not walls, not coldness, boundaries. The kind that protect your peace, your confidence, and your direction, especially when you're dealing with someone who keeps rejecting you. I've seen so many men lose themselves emotionally because they didn't have boundaries. They'd answer every message instantly, drop everything when she called, give endless emotional support, and stay available no matter how many times she pushed them away. And they didn't realize that every time they did that, they were quietly telling her, "My needs don't matter. Only yours do." That's the emotional trap repeated rejection creates. It convinces you that the more you give, the better your chances. But in reality, the more you give without boundaries, the more invisible you become. I remember a man once describing this exact experience. He wasn't even dating the woman. She rejected him multiple times, but emotionally, he felt tied to her. She'd vent to him about other men, rely on him for comfort, and reach out when she felt lonely. The moment he started to show romantic interest, she'd back away again. He didn't realize it, but he was emotionally exposed while she was emotionally protected. When we talked about boundaries, he hesitated. He said, "I don't want to push her away." What he didn't see was that he had already pushed himself away. That's what happens without boundaries. You disappear into someone else's emotional needs while ignoring your own. Setting emotional boundaries means understanding that you're not responsible for someone else's feelings, decisions, or confusion. It's choosing not to pour energy into a one-sided emotional connection. It's saying, "I can care about you, but not at the cost of losing myself." Boundaries look like this. You stop responding immediately to every message because your time matters too. You stop offering emotional support that drains you. You stop being the backup option she leans on between rejections. You stop over-explaining your intentions just to keep her comfortable. You stop sacrificing your peace just to stay connected. And here's the part that usually surprises men. When you set boundaries, you don't become less caring. You become stronger, clearer, and more grounded. You're no longer driven by fear of losing her. You're no longer reacting to every shift in her mood. You're no longer giving more than you receive. Boundaries create emotional safety for you. They help you stay connected to your values. They stop you from chasing chaos and start guiding you toward relationships that feel mutual and healthy. And yes, sometimes boundaries reveal the truth. When you start honoring yourself, some people pull away because they only valued the version of you that didn't have limits, but that's a good thing. Boundaries expose what connections were never real to begin with. When you learn to protect your emotional space, you stop letting rejection define your peace. You become a man who stands firm even when someone else is unsure. 7. Learn when to finally walk away for peace. There comes a moment in every man's life when he has to make a choice that isn't easy, isn't comfortable, and definitely isn't what he imagined. But it's the moment that saves him. That moment is learning when to walk away. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but out of a deep understanding that your peace is worth more than someone's inconsistent interest. I've sat with men who held on to a woman long after she made her feelings clear. They held on because of potential, memories, emotional attachment, or simply because they believed things would eventually change if they just waited long enough. One man told me once, "I'm scared that if I walk away, I'll miss my chance." What he didn't realize was that the longer he stayed, the more he was missing his chance at peace. Walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself over the fantasy of what could be. Think about how much emotional energy gets drained when you keep pursuing someone who keeps rejecting you. The doubts, the second-guessing, the anxiety before every message, the overthinking after every interaction. Your mind becomes a battlefield you never meant to enter. You lose sleep. You lose confidence. You lose the sense of who you are outside of this situation. And that's why walking away becomes powerful. It's the turning point where you reclaim your identity. I remember talking to someone who struggled with this for months. He kept hoping she'd finally choose him. Every time she showed a little warmth, he'd hold on to it like proof that things might change. But every time he tried to move forward, she shut the door again. The day he decided to walk away, he told me he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not because he didn't care anymore, but because he finally stopped betraying himself. Walking away is an act of self-respect. It's the moment you say, "I deserve more than confusion." It's understanding that someone who truly wants you won't keep you in emotional limbo. It's realizing that love isn't something you chase. It's something that flows both ways, and here's what men don't expect. The world looks different once you walk away. Your thoughts get clearer. Your confidence starts rebuilding itself. Your time feels like yours again. You stop waiting for notifications that never come. You stop checking for signs of hope. You begin to reconnect with your goals, your friends, your purpose, your masculine center. Most importantly, you rediscover the version of you that existed before rejection became your focus. Sometimes walking away is the closure you never got. It's the healing you didn't know you needed. It's the beginning of a new chapter where your peace becomes non-negotiable. And if she ever realizes what she lost, that's no longer your responsibility. Your responsibility is to your own growth, your own heart, your own life. Walking away isn't weakness. it's evolution, and it's one of the strongest decisions a man can ever make. At the end of the day, repeated rejection isn't a verdict on your worth. It's a message about where your energy no longer belongs. Every man deserves clarity, respect, and emotional peace. And sometimes the strongest move you can make is stepping back, reassessing, and choosing yourself. When you stop chasing, set boundaries, and walk away when needed, you regain your confidence and direction. Rejection becomes a lesson, not a wound. And as you grow from it, you naturally move toward connections that are mutual, healthy, and fulfilling. Your worth doesn't come from who chooses you, it comes from how you choose yourself.